you know too that our next concert is the Marilyn Schoenfeld Memorial Concert, and it will feature Marilyn's daughter and granddaughter and two groups that they play with. It's going to be fantastic. It will also be in this room, and it is on June 14th, a Sunday at 3 o'clock. But without further ado, we introduce Ken, and I'm really excited.
So, I'm going to try to stand near this, and for those of you who have not been in music school for the last 25 years or so, you may need to have a little clarification about what a musical style means in a country or in a certain music. It basically means what it sounds like. And for instance, in America, our music is influenced by jazz a lot, and so there's a good chance that classical American music will include that in its style. It's an interesting situation as far as Israel goes. It's interesting on the one hand because it's an enormous, enormous subject. Israel probably has more composers than any other country in the world per capita because of its history, and probably even more musicians in general. But I wanted to take sort of 4 points about formulating the style and try to give some musical examples for them. The first point is the music that's in place already in an area, in a geographical area. How does that affect the style? In the Middle East, where Israel is located, you have Middle Eastern sounds, and therefore you're going to have that as a part of the component of Israeli music. The another important thing is the immigration element in Israel. People have come in waves there ever since back as far as you could go back to the 1880s, and these waves of immigration began to start. Another thing in Israel that's really important is pop culture, and that's true all over the world because the pervasive culture of the United States, the pop sound has permeated music from all over the world. So you'll find an element of that. Another thing is the youth of the country. It's now 67 years old as of very recently, and for most countries, that's a very young country, and for a lot of the places where you consider musical style, it's quite young because you're thinking of hundreds of years of music, if not thousands. So, taking those things, before I go any further, I wanted to point out that the handout I gave you, which is behind your program, that's just a little outline of the things that have happened, or some things that have happened to form Israeli music and therefore to form its style as since the 1880s, which is we're sort of using as our taking off place. So, going on from there, Israel, I want to talk particularly about the immigration situation. Israel has been a melting pot for people from all over the world. They've wanted to immigrate there to have a sense of their identity, sense of living in a homeland, and they've often felt that they had to because they had to escape someplace else. That's included whole communities of people who've picked up and moved lock, stock, and barrel there. And so you had communities, that's generally Sephardic nature, people from North Africa or that sort of thing, who had moved to Israel. Then you have immigration from Western Europe, which was usually for political reasons. And so you have a meeting of those two, and that's a really, really interesting point about that, this East-West thing. There was little interest in, say, the 1920s and so forth of developing the Eastern aspect of the music. But as people began to come from Europe, there was a great deal of music interest among them, and organizations began to be founded. You can see a list of those on that handout. I won't go ahead and mention every one of them. But we're going to fast forward to the 1930s, which was an important time, and where we'll really begin with the music. That is a time when people were fleeing fascism in Europe, and among them was an important composer for Israel. You'd have to call him the father of Israeli music, Paul Ben-Haim. Have any of you heard of him? So, he's probably, like I said, the father of Israeli music as such. He was very influenced by a singer by the name of Bracha Zefira, who was Yemenite, and had her own style of singing. It's very Middle Eastern sounding. Everybody knows what I mean by that, right? Where you have a lot of open sounds and scales that are not like our scales and so forth like that. He was very, very influenced in her style of singing. And so in 1939, he began to write on her style. He had come from Munich, where he was established as a professional musician, quite active. He was not only was a composer there, where he wrote a lot of German art songs, German language art songs, but he was also an opera coach and a theater repetiteur kind of thing, director or assistant conductor in theater in Augsburg and in Munich. And things were getting bad, and he lost his job because he was Jewish, as many people did. That was a big part of the Western European immigration, a big cause for it. So there he was. He came to Israel, changed his name from Frankenberger to Ben-Haim, and began to establish himself as a musician. And later on, he became associated with Bracha Zefira and began to write music sort of in her style, sort of an amalgam, East-West kind of style, which the pieces that I have on the program, the first ones, are an example of that kind of style from him. I'm going to talk just a little bit about them. The Pastorale. Pastorale is an old European form. It has to do with the music you might associate with shepherds or something like that. So it's sort of, you can think of a lonely flute or something that a shepherd boy might be playing. That's exactly what you'll hear in this. Canzone is also an old form. It just means song. And in Ben-Haim's hand, it turns into sort of an exotic sounding song. You have, I think it's a little bit of a description of the country. It's a feeling, very much a feeling of freshness, fresh air type thing, sunshine, and a sort of desert kind of feeling. And in the middle of that particular one, there's a very, very sort of more personal kind of song. And the toccata at the end, I think, alludes to the use of percussion in Middle Eastern music quite a bit. And there's also a section in the middle of it which is very vocal. And if you've ever had the chance to hear Bracha Zefira sing, you can do so on YouTube. She has a style of bending pitches around, and it's very, very much a Middle Eastern kind of style. And the middle of this piece reminds me very much of her. So we'll listen to the Pastorale, the Canzone, and the Toccata from the 5 pieces for piano of Paul Ben-Haim. so I'll say it before I wake up tonight in bed, is that in Europe at that time, after Wagner, music had sort of broken down and had to sort of start over because Wagner had taken traditional tonality and so forth to where it just couldn't go any further. And one of the things that people tried was to find the music of the people who were in a certain place. For instance, Bartók in Hungary went in and out with a recording device of some sort, whatever they had then, and recorded people's songs, and he used that to make his own music. And so this is a little bit like that. In Spain, you had De Falla doing the same thing. And so I feel that Ben Haim was, that's something from the West that he brought to Israel. And that desire to do that kind of music, I feel that he was influenced by people like that who did that. And speaking of which, the next pieces are by Andrei Haidú, who is an immigrant from Hungary. He came to Israel in 1966 after having studied in Paris. And let me also back up just a little bit about one other thing. In Israel, you had this disparate group of people coming there, and the need to make a state or to make a group of people that were coherent with each other was great. One thing that was done to make that happen was the adoption of Hebrew as the national language. And so people learned to speak Hebrew in the correct way by songs. They were taught songs to get the accent right and all this kind of thing like that. So that was one thing. But in addition to that, there were other educational venues for teaching people about the music that belonged to them and so forth. And Andrei Haidú was important in that. He collected prayer songs, which the name of this next group is Two Prayer Songs, but he collected songs that were used in religious situations, and then he wrote pieces out of that in sort of easy piano style in order to teach people the tunes and to sort of bind them together as one people. And so we're going to hear a two-movement set called Two Prayer Songs, which he wrote in 1974-75. The state sponsored the writing of these things to a great deal. And this is not an exception to that. The first one is, he took the idea of the melody from the Passover Haggadah. It's a Hasidic melody. And the second one is for Rosh Chodesh, which is the beginning of the new month. So it's from the Ashkenazi prayer book. I'd be interested to know if anybody is familiar with these tunes, if you've heard them, if they're in your past or whatever like that. Just as a point of interest. So, here we go with those.
No, we can't see.
Now move it, like,
I can't see his hands. I love watching.
right.
There we go.
So this is the first one. sources like the internet tells you. He is still living and still teaching. He was a composition faculty, I believe, in Tel Aviv. Do you know of him? Do you know him?
I know him as a composer for a lot of choral stuff too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, let me
More
say about
children's
that.
choirs.
About that. These are the only two pieces that I've programmed today that are referring religion. Okay? That doesn't mean that there's not a ton of Israeli composed music that is of a religious nature and I would say of a Jewish nature and just a historical feeling about the people. There's quite a lot. But most of that needs a text, and we don't have that here. So that'll be the next concert.
Not today.
I'll have to enlist
Maybe next year.
enlist
Next
help
year.
for that. But there's a wealth of information, a wealth of music like that, which just contributes to make the whole field really, really large. The next piece is by Yehezkel Brown, who is a composer who just passed away, I believe, last winter. He came from Breslau in Germany when he was very young, and I believe 1924 or something like that came to Israel because he was really like 2 years old, and I believe he was born in 1922. We are lucky that we have somebody here who knows or knew Yehezkel Brown in Israel, and she probably could go on about him much more than I. But I think that he's a very, very interesting character in that he wrote tons of music, and some of it dealing with one of his special interests, which was monody. Monody is something that you find both in Judaism and in the Catholic Church anyway, because it's like Gregorian chant. It's anytime you have a single melody and no accompaniment with it whatsoever, no harmonization or anything like that. So he was very interested in Jewish monody and made a collection of it, as a matter of fact. And later on in his life, in 1975, he went to France, to Solesmes, where at the Abbey, and he studied Gregorian chant there for a year to further his interest in monody. I chose this piece that I'm going to play because I think it somewhat reflects that, although it's a fully harmonized piece, and you'll hear that about it, but it has the flavor of chant, and there are some monodic places written in the music as well, reflecting his style that way. About the title, it comes from a title called Strange Encounters. I have no idea what that means, but I know that this is an encounter in green, it's called, and there's also a piece called Encounter in Gold in it, and beyond that, I just don't really know too much of where and couldn't find any more about it than where the title came. But it's a beautiful, beautiful piece, and that's plenty reason to do it. Last year, for those of you who are not members of Am Shalom, we did a Jewish Music Heritage Shabbat using Yehezkel Brown's music. So he's written quite a bit of religious music, and we did quite a bit of it on our service for them. So here's the Encounters in Green of Yehezkel Brown. Sounds very French, this piece. So quasi-impressionistic. So, going on, next thing is a nocturne, not a nocturne, excuse me, a lullaby. Lullabies usually happen in the nocturnal. But anyway, it's by Zev Bitkin. Zev Bitkin is an immigrant from the time of the post-Soviet Union wave of people from the Soviet bloc countries. He comes actually from Moldavia, and he was educated in Moscow at the Tchaikovsky Conservatory, and then went back to teach there in Chisinau, which is the capital of Moldavia. If I didn't learn anything else from this whole project, I learned that. And so he was there, and then when he had the opportunity in, I think, 1993, he came to Israel to live, and he lives in Hebron, is where he settled. He calls himself a polystylist in his writing. There's not a whole lot about him, but his own biography that he's written for the Israeli Music Center says that. And this is a very, very beautiful piece. It comes probably from the fact that, once again, this is a thread that's common to everybody so far. He collected a lot of Jewish folk tunes, particularly Moldavian ones in his case. And he's also a jazz pianist. So it's an interesting combination of things. It probably shouldn't really say this, but it's my favorite piece on the whole thing. It's really a lovely thing, and I love how he weaves jazz. And now it's not really jazz, because it's not improvisatory. It's written to sound improvisatory, and so that's a slight difference. But it's using the jazz idiom for sure. So we'll listen to the lullaby of Zev Bitkin. I found a lot of this music. I found almost all of the music at the Northwestern Library just by Googling Israeli composers, and so my regret is that all the things that I missed, I'm sure, we'd have to have a class like this every day for 20 years or something.
What are you doing tomorrow?
I will be starting over. I'm to learn. Oh, thanks. You wonder why Albert's sitting over here keeps track of my music. So anyway, this is the lullaby. It comes from a sonata. It's called the Sonata of Day and Night. And so here it is. is by the composer Avner Dorman, who was born, I believe, in 1975. Yes, because he's 40 years old now. This is a piece that he wrote in 1998 while he was studying in Israel at Tel Aviv University. Subsequently, he came and did a doctorate at the Juilliard School in New York, and he lives in this country now, and in Pennsylvania, where he teaches at Gettysburg College, teaches composition. And he's also head of, the name of the musical group in Cleveland that has escaped me, but he's head of that now. He's had a tremendous amount of success in his composition. First of all his piano music is published by G. Schirmer Company, which is like unbelievable for, when, for instance, the Israeli Music Center, the Bitkin piece, is sort of a cooperative of composers, I think, who work together and publish their music. And you order this, and they print it up at the moment, and then send it to you. That's the way that works. But, Avner Dorman's music is available in fully printed form by G. Schirmer. As I said, probably the most famous printing company in this country for music.
By the way, it's the City Music Cleveland Chamber Orchestra.
Thank you. Okay.
It's
Great.
the internet.
So about this piece, he was studying with the Georgian, an immigrant from Georgia who had come to Israel, Ardanashvili, who is a composer himself in Israel, and so this was sort of a graduation piece that he did. So he was 23 years old. I have to say, for him, he would probably want me to say that it's an early piece and he's moved on since then, and believe me, he has, because his music is, he's really moved into grander forms. Anyway, he says about this piece that the first movement is based on a Scarlatti sonata. Scarlatti was a composer, was born in 1685, and wrote about 600 sonatas for the Queen Maria Barbara in Spain, where he lived. So I don't know which one of the sonatas is based on it, but he says it's based on one. But I would say that would just be the seed of it, because it doesn't take long when he gets started that it does not sound like a Scarlatti sonata anymore, I can tell you that for sure. What it does sound like is jazz. It sounds like jazz, it sounds like movie music, it sounds like pop tunes, the whole works. And so that, if you remember back, I said the pop culture affected everybody in the world. The pop culture emanated from the United States, and it certainly has affected him. The second movement is based on sort of a pop ballad. But he says, and this is a very interesting thing, I think, that the format of it is based on the second movement of Opus 111 of Beethoven. Well, Opus 111 of Beethoven is the second movement also has a beautiful tune at the beginning of it, and then it's just a fantasy of variation after it, and the tune comes back at the end of it, and I can tell you right now that it's one of the most celestial moments in all of music when that happens, if it's done well. So he has used that kind of form. You have this sort of pop tune. It's not a quoted pop tune, but it's sort of a pop tune style. It does remind me of "You're Much Too Good to Be True" by Frankie Valli, but it's not that. And so it's a tune that he's composed and has that kind of sound. The third movement is a set of theme and variations, which is not unusual for a sonata like that. It's about, I think it's 6 variations, and it's just sort of humoristic and very rhythmic and youthful. And that's another thing about this sonata that I think I really notice a lot, is his sort of youthful vitality. It's sort of, it's a great piece for that, and you wonder if he looks back on it and said, I was young then. But anyway, it's So this is the Avner Dorman Sonata. Recently, there was an article in the New Yorker advertising a concert of Israeli composers' music at Avery Fisher Hall, and it included the music of Avner Dorman and called him one of the up-and-coming composers of Israel. So I was glad to see that when I saw it because I thought I had chosen well. some things other than piano, maybe. It's a lot of big choral things and that sort of thing. Thank you so much for spending the middle of your week.
What's for dessert?
Made brownies.
So don't forget to have some fruit. I actually made brownies. No nuts, they're butterscotch chips in them. And thank you, Ken, so much. Thank you. Teach again for us. I think I might have broke myself into that earlier in class, but that's okay. Two things. One is that, so the next two things that we have coming up, I'll say the second one first, is July 21st. It's a Tuesday early evening. It's going to be in this beautiful courtyard that will not be for a children's playground at that moment, but a great musician, Noah Aronson, who has been touring the country with his original Jewish music. By trade, he's actually a jazz pianist, so a lot of that is in his music. So it's more of a contemporary style. He's bringing a band of 4 Israeli artists with him as well that he went to school with at Berkeley in Boston, and one of which I actually played with a number of times in Israel. And then, as I mentioned at the opening, we have the Marilyn Schoenfeld Memorial Concert coming up, and Phil, so great that you're here. And also, I thought, well, I see Fran Sherman here, and I thought she might want to say a couple words about our June 14th.
Well, first of all, Ken, this was just such a delight.
Just
Thank you.
fantastic.
Thank you for all of the music. I learned so much. It was wonderful. You'll not need to learn anything if you come in June, but I hope to give you a delightful afternoon of music in memory of my mom. And we're doing something special this year, just in a couple of weeks, June 14th, as Andrea Andreas said. In addition, I am bringing some wonderful friends who perform in the Black Oak Ensemble. It's a new ensemble made of local musicians who you have probably heard of. They're doing remarkable things. They're playing on the radio, they're playing in the city, and it's going to be a very special opportunity to have them here. And the other half of the program will be led by my daughter, Marilyn's granddaughter, who is performing with her own string quartet of young people. And so that will be our afternoon, and we hope you'll all come and bring friends and we're looking forward to it.
Be in this room.
3
Yeah,
o'clock.
it'll be in this room, same space. Any questions?
Yeah, do you have any questions?
When is the next event like this, Ken, that you're going to be leading?
After the high holidays.
When is the next series of 3 classes?
It'll be after the next one, really.
Wonderful.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
You know, it's a big reception.